So we're not live. I'm going to give the attendees a chance to jump in, and I'll do some overview, intros, things of that nature. I'll lay out the general thrust of the program for the evening, try to do my best to get in and out, and then pass it on to the moderator for the evening. But to those who are jumping on, thank you so much. We sincerely appreciate it. And there will be a chance for the attendees to ask questions. I'll set the framework on what those questions uh, must look like in order for them to be affirmed and responded to. I'll be taking the questions that'll be in the chat and forwarding them to the moderator. But again, thank you, everybody. It is 6 o'clock. And you know what? I'm going to make the most of our time because I want us to have as much of a robust conversation as we possibly can. So again, good evening to everybody, especially to our wonderful panelists. I'm grateful that each of you took time out of your schedule to join us in this conversation and this robust discussion on labor and wages as part of the Up to Vote 901 efforts to educate the voters in the voter base. I need to take a moment and introduce everyone who may be checking this out for the first time, who Up to Vote 901 is and what it is that we do. So this is uptovote901.com, which is our website. We encourage everybody to check it out early and often, even as we know that early voting is underway, and we are grateful for the massive turnout that has taken place up to this point, but we know that our job is not done. The mission of Up to Vote 901 is to give more political power, information, and representation to more people. Our vision is to increase voter turnout in Memphis and Shelby County in every election. You can go to our website to register to vote and to check your registration. So if you click register to vote, as I have done, this screen will pop up. You can direct people here to register to vote, to pledge to vote, which is to make a voting plan. And Up to Vote 901 is encouraging everyone to make a voting plan. You should know which day you're going to vote, which location you're going to vote at. If you're going to vote absentee by mail, you have until October the 27th to request an absentee ballot. Thankful for the work of Up to Vote 901 and the legal team that we've been in partnership with, and all of those wonderful citizens who were courageous enough to file a lawsuit against the Secretary of State, which has expanded absentee ballots to the vast majority of citizens across the state. So we're grateful for that. But you can also get your friends to vote. We encourage everybody to check our website out to do those things, to check out the latest on our events. If you want to submit an event that you want us to attend or partner with you on, you can do that as well on our website. Lastly, I want to take a minute and talk about the Memphis People's Agenda, which is the baseline for our conversation this evening. For those who were with us in September, we took a section of this agenda, which is based upon the results of over 2,200 online surveys where people responded to questions about issues that are important to them. Most of the respondents responded with an overwhelming majority on the issues that are coded here, which indicates at least 51% of survey respondents selected agree or strongly agree regarding these things. Those which were not overwhelming majorities have been specified with an asterisk. In September, we took time to deal with the crime and public safety section. And on this evening, we will deal with the labor and wages section, where Memphians overwhelmingly want labor and wage initiatives that include living wage requirements for employees, requirements for companies receiving payments in lieu of taxes to pay all employees a living wage, requirements for companies that use temporary services to provide health insurance and pay living wages to all temporary employees, and requirements for companies that receive support and or funding from the city to hire permanent employees. So this is the baseline for our conversation this evening. I want to take a moment to give you just the basics of how we will conduct our conversation this evening and set the framework before I pass it to our moderator. So with the labor and wages section of the Memphis People's Agenda as our foundation, this symposium aims to dive deep into some of the details that make up the current landscape of jobs, employment, payment, and poverty in Memphis. We also want to focus on constructive ways to promote and advocate for the types of policies and practices that would create and sustain a more equitable economy in Memphis. We have selected the people we have selected because Up the Vote 901 is committed to the truth about what is going on in our community. We are committed to offering a diverse opinion as part of the panel, and every one of these panelists and our moderator's perspective is important to us and appreciated. There will be a chance throughout this symposium for the audience to ask questions in the chat. Now, I want to be very clear. We will do our best to ensure that your questions are entertained, but the questions have to fit this criteria. The question has to be directly related to this topic, labor and wages in the Memphis People's Agenda. The question has to be able to be adequately responded to by either one of the panelists or the moderator. And the question has to be something that has not already been addressed in the opening discussion amongst the panelists. I'm going to say those criteria again. Number one, the question has to be directly related to the topic. Number two, the question has to be able to be adequately responded to by one of the panelists and or the moderator. And number three, the question cannot already have been addressed in the opening discussion amongst the panelists. So without further ado, I want to introduce the panelists and the moderator representing the Memphis Central Labor Council is Sweet Trika Baker, and we are glad to have her. We are also here with the founder of the Urban Child Institute, Brother Gary Shore. We are also here with the CEO of the Memphis Chamber of Commerce, the incomparable Beverly Robertson. And we are also here with the Memphis City Council Super District 8-3, Mr. Martavius Jones, who is important to this discussion because he was also the city council representative on the EDGE board, which is the Economic Development Growth Engine Board. And so I want to pass this off to the COO of Up the Vote 901, who will be our moderator for this evening, Mr. C.J. Willow Crawford. You got it from here. Go ahead, brother.
All right, thanks. Glad to see each of you on, and I want to just kind of lay out the general framework so people know what to expect. We do want to start by talking about some local things here in Memphis, which I think all of you guys as panelists are definitely qualified to talk about. I do want to move to some conversation about what's happening federally, though. So I think it's important to realize that Memphis doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so there are some trends and ideas that permeate Memphis that it would be maybe difficult for Memphis to break away from. And then lastly, I want to talk about maybe reform versus revolution. We saw some traction with one of the presidential candidates for the Democratic Party, namely Bernie Sanders, get some traction by talking about socialism. And whether or not people agree, I think that we should have some conversation with varied opinion on if capitalism is the best road, right? Is it going to be fair? Is this the path to the most economic growth, et cetera, et cetera? So if I could ask, I'll give each panelist an opportunity to respond. I'm going to ask the question in a way that I think is provocative that gets to the question of living wages. Do McDonald's workers need $15 an hour? I'm going to kind of just ask, maybe let's start with Sweet Trika as the labor person. Why not? McDonald's workers $15 an hour or a living wage, however you want to frame.
So actually, yes, they should be. McDonald's workers are a part of the food industry. And as you know, McDonald's is also unionized in some states. So, and that's really important. The reason why I know some people say $15, that's a lot. I don't even make $15. The problem is you should be, because the actual income for a living wage is at least $15, at least. There is no one that can survive off of $17.25 as a minimum wage. That is an allowance, and nobody can get by on that. Actually, after doing calculations, a person even making $10 an hour has to work 61 hours a week to meet the needs of their family at a median of, at a bare minimum of like 30,000 a year. So it's when you really look at it, that's the problem. We've got a lot of people that are working 2 and 3 jobs. A lot of people working at McDonald's are also retirees. They've been forced to go back to work because their income is not supplemented enough with Social Security. There's not enough retirement plans out there for people, and pension. So we have to protect that bottom line too, because they were here first, and they drive our economy just as well.
Thanks so much. Martavius Jones, what do you think?
Tell you what, I'm doing a little research on the fly here. Can you come back to me if you don't mind?
Sure. Ms.
Okay.
Beverly Robertson, what do you think?
I think yes to that question. And I would definitely agree with what Sweetrika has said. We've done a good bit of research, and we're engaged with a project with the Brookings Institute that's really laying out a lot of information about wages, you know, both from a national perspective and then the application of that to the local area. And people often think of Memphis as a low wage area. We may be a low cost, but we're not trying to promote low wages in Memphis, Tennessee. That's not the objective of what we do at the chamber and the work. Now, I'm not saying that it may not have been done before, but what I'm saying is that's not our goal, to promote low wages, because what we realize is that when you really start looking at some of the data, and I've looked at some of the data, I mean, 15 is the bottom. Really, you need to be striving for 18, 20, 22, and those areas. But if you're starting from 11, but I will say this, and this is the beauty of some of these meetings that we've been having, is a lot of the companies that were at 13 are now at 15 or $18 an hour. And when you start talking about being able to understand the impact of that, I know the university is doing some research on that. So we really understand what happens in the marketplace when people make $15 or $18 an hour. And I think that's important. So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Gary Short?
I totally agree. I think $15 an hour should be the minimum. The challenge is, how do we get there? We can't wait for the federal government. The minimum wage has been at $7.25 probably for 2 decades. So the market has to move. And to Beverly's point, the market is moving. That's the good news. I mean, you got Nike, FedEx, Baptist, Methodist, First Horizon, all are moving to $15 an hour. So that's really what we need. That's the quickest way to get it done. And we need to just continue to ask large businesses, especially, to do that. Now, small business is a whole different thing. You start talking about people 10 employees or less, revenue of under $100,000 or $200,000. That's a stretch for some folks. But let's target what we think we can achieve, and that's with the larger corporations here in Memphis.
Certainly. Martavius, are you ready now?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me okay? I got a little static in my ear.
We hear you fine.
Okay. To be honest with you, I had to evolve to this. And that evolution probably took place about maybe about 8 to 10 years ago. Well, no, not even that long. It was shortly before I got on the Memphis City Council. And I'll tell you how it evolved. At that time, I think I may have been out of college about 25 years. This year, I've been out of college 30 years. And so what I thought about was just hearing this, and I'm almost to the point to where 15 isn't enough. And here's the perspective I'm going to provide for it. And these are just out of these 2 and these 4 eyes that I have here. My first job out of college, 30 years ago, it was salary, but it was the salary was the equivalent of $13.25. So $26,500, 30 years ago. Now, I was graduated from college, but how my evolution took place, I thought about 30 years prior to my graduating from college, which would have been 1960. Can we expect somebody, let's say that they weren't graduating from college, but they were graduating from high school, but entering the workforce in 1960? Can somebody who would have graduated the 30 years prior with me, can we say to them that you need to be making what somebody in 1960 was making when they graduated with me in 1990? That minimum wage back then was $1.75. So should we say, now the difference between the minimum wage or $15 now and what my salary was over a 30-year period of time is just 13%. We're talking about an increase of not even 1% per year. It's a fraction of that. So the bottom line is that yes, my short answer is yes. I know I was giving you a long way of how I evolved to that. My professional job, I'm a financial advisor. The good thing about being about a numbers-oriented business is that the numbers don't lie. You know the bad thing about the numbers don't lie. So it's a double-edged sword. We have to get better than that. We can't say and expect someone 30 years from now to be making 10, 12% more than what we are paying people right now. It's just absolutely ridiculous to have that suggestion.
Thanks so much, Martavius. So I want to push the conversation forward a little bit. So Gary mentioned what I think is a magic word, which is the market. And it was really juxtaposed to top-down legislation that will require a change in wages. And so I think the real question that people have there, all of you guys said yes, there are people who would say no. And it can range from what I think are more derogatory, pejorative sort of views about workers who do things that we think of as unimportant or menial, to supposed market-driven economics sort of arguments. And so they would say, well, do they produce $15 an hour? Like, is their job worth it? If we paid them $15 per hour, does that mean that unemployment will rise, or that this will cause some spike in inflation? And I don't want to script the order this time. Does anybody want to kind of jump into that? Like, what should we be using to determine people's wages? Let me ask it that. Is it our just sentiment for their humanity, or is there some number that maybe their wage should be tied to?
Well, it's almost a circular response because the market determines the market.
Mm-hmm.
When you have and it's almost I don't have any empirical data to support this, but it just seems to be when we only go after the industries and the jobs where $13, $14, $15 an hour wages or salaries, those are most prevalent. That's what we're going to get. I recall a good friend of mine who was in the news business. She was a reporter. She said that if I only apply for reporter jobs, I'll never be an anchor. So if we want to have those higher paying jobs, we have to go out there and we have to recruit them. Now, I know a lot of pushback that I get when I say that. Well, our workforce isn't there. I lived in Nashville. I went to school in Washington, D.C. I lived in Hartford, Connecticut. And I guarantee you, if you look at major cities that we're trying to emulate, everybody isn't homegrown. If the jobs are there, the people will come. We need to create that environment. And I would contend that we haven't done so as a community.
All right, anybody else?
I'd like to weigh in a little bit on that. I mean, I think what Martavius is talking about goes back to when Memphis was viewed as the distribution capital of the South. I will tell you, though, that that's not where we are now. I will tell you that we have 3 bodies of research that say that in order for Memphis to move forward, we've got to align the businesses that we recruit with the assets of the marketplace. And so what that has meant for us is there are 3 major areas in which we are recruiting as the Greater Memphis Chamber. And I think it bears noting. 1, medical device industry and technology, medical devices and technology. That's one industry. Logistics and transportation technology. is the second one. And the third one is food and ag technology, because these are all about locations. And this is about machine learning. This is about artificial intelligence. This is really about robotics. This is about, and here's the other side of that. So a lot of people don't know that these are the three industries of focus for the Greater Memphis Chamber, and not just the distribution center of the South. The second thing I would say is that we have to make sure that as we are recruiting, we are also running parallel tracks on building a talented pipeline and a workforce to be able to address those. And so now we have a center of excellence at the university where young people who don't want to pursue college can get a certificate in these new technologies and get a job making $70,000 a year. So that means that we've got to build a pipeline for us to have the talent to be able to do these jobs. So I just wanted to make sure that we are aware of what we are doing. And we've had 3 major surveys conducted and all of them aligned around these 3 major industries that need to be recruited into Memphis. So a lot of people are not aware of that, and we need to broaden the awareness of the work of what we're doing to drive higher wages, higher paying jobs into the marketplace.
Sure, thanks for that response. And I'll check with the other 2 panelists to see if they have a response, but I do want to clarify something. So you highlighted 3 areas of focus that you believe are like really critical to higher wage earning. I do want to be clear that I picked McDonald's workers for a reason, because I want to know, are you saying that, basically they need to pick another job, or are we saying, look, all workers need a living wage? I just want to give you a chance.
Let me tell you something. All workers need a living wage. Let me start with that fundamentally.
Okay. All right.
But I'm talking about these jobs will pay even higher wages.
Gotcha.
Assuming that they get the skills and the certifications to be able to do them. That's
right. And I do want to come back to that in a minute. I saw about a year ago, you talked about jobs in the tens of thousands that were available, but that we were having problems finding people who were skilled. I think you pledged that the chamber would raise the money to train them. And so I do want to come back to that. But Sweet Trika or Gary, do either one of you have anything to chime in here?
Well, I just say, just in agreement with Beverly, $15 a minimum with health benefits. That's an important aspect of having a living wage. You've got to have healthcare coverage. Mm-hmm. And that really what Beverly's talking about, what I agree with, is job training that enables people to get to 60, 70,000 where they truly have some discretionary income. They can truly live a comfortable life. I mean, that's really what we all ought to be aspiring to do for all of our citizens. That's not an overnight proposition. Right now in healthcare, there is a severe shortage of nurses and healthcare workers. Nurses make $75,000, $80,000 a year at least. That's if you're non-supervisory or you're working at the bedside. So there's real opportunity out there, but we've got to be able to offer people good training, good education to be able to capture it.
All right, Sweet Trika.
Yeah, it's something I wanted to bring up and just kind of want to reference the AFL-CIO. It's known that cutting edge technology advancements are causing some challenges and actually has saved some lives. And like you mentioned before, as Beverly mentioned, we are definitely having to attack the technology change. The problem with technology is that in some cases it's replacing people. And we've got to put other jobs in place for those individuals that are being knocked out of those positions. So technology has always involved changing the way we work. It has always meant eliminating some jobs, but that is why it's important for us as we put those things in place, the technology that we create other jobs. The technology is also there to make our workplaces safer. So, it helps to eliminate the lives of people that will be put at risk. But at the same time, we still have to keep the well-being of those people in mind also. They still have to make money. They still have to, be able to provide for their families. And on the upper end of people that are getting closer to retirement, technology is a huge challenge for them. So what can we do in place for them instead of putting them at McDonald's, which is also becoming technology ridden? Like you go over to Union at the McDonald's, where are you going? You're going to a kiosk. And it's changing, Kroger's. we're doing self-checkouts. We're checking out for ourselves. We're almost paying for our food and paying for the service at the same time. And it's not really making a lot of sense because we're not putting other people in places. And it was mentioned earlier about McDonald's workers, are they worth being paid $15 an hour? If you pay people what they are worth, if you pay them for the service that you are asking for, and you train them properly to give a service, and you get your dollars worth. But if you put somebody behind a desk and you tell them to prepare food, they're going to get frustrated because orders are constantly coming in through this kiosk, and no one is there really to man the customer service. So there is the miss, in my opinion. Something else that I wanted to bring up, and I want to be crazy short about it, is when I was referring to what people are making per year, poverty wage is actually definitely for someone who has 2 children, $8.25 an hour. And we're offering that to people in Memphis. And they're saying, well, you go get a certification, go get a skill, but we're limiting our citizens where they can get those skills. A living wage for someone with 2 children should be $26.66 an hour. And that's to pay for necessities. Insurance alone is expensive. Then you have the cost of childcare, which is $7,400 a year. We have to take all of these things in consideration while we're discussing what is a livable wage.
Thanks so much. So I'm gonna move towards some other areas. We talked about like which companies are getting payments in lieu of taxes and tips, and the temporary work, I'm going to call it an epidemic. And I want to get into that, but I want to come back to Martavius, because you were one who said that you had to evolve, right, to move towards this understanding that people should have a living wage. I want to assume that everybody listening to this isn't the choir who already would say yes. Can you briefly talk about that evolution? Like, what was your rationale beforehand? Because maybe somebody shares that rationale, and it'd be interesting to see how somebody could move from that rationality to the one you have now. So what were you thinking 25 years ago?
Well, one of the things I was not aware of was, I go back to when I was a teenager, or when I was in my early 20s. And that a job at McDonald's back then, we're talking 30, 35 years ago, that was for someone who may have been in school part-time. What I wasn't aware of is that you had people who were the real breadwinners of their families now working in McDonald's. And knowing that, and I go back to my $13.25 30 years ago, and that was just me. So I can only imagine if I had other mouths to feed. And I really just looked at the reality. It may have been one of those things where I hadn't gone to McDonald's in a while, and I know it's just a stereotypical, I know that we're just using McDonald's as a broad range of the fast food industry. But when you really go in and see that these are not just teenagers or tweeners or just young adults right now, but these are folks who are in their mid to late 20s, 30s, whatever the case may be, and a full spectrum. That's really where the evolution took place. When I said, well, gosh, if I was struggling, just me, on $13.25 30 years ago, I can only imagine somebody who has the responsibility of taking care of whether it's 1, 2, however many children that they have. That's where the evolution took place.
All right, so let's move forward. And maybe you're the person to talk about this too, Martavius, because I think we want to talk about the EDGE board at this point, right? So the EDGE board is kind of tasked with thinking about incentives for businesses here, right? Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that, these tax breaks that companies get are kind of tied to an agreement of providing jobs and a certain rate of pay. Let's start with, is that true? And how has that panned out?
Well, the EDGE board predated my being elected to the city council. I think the EDGE board came about in 2010, 2011. So we are coming up on about 10 years of the EDGE board being around. I served for 2 years as the Memphis City Council's liaison to the EDGE board as a non-voting member of the EDGE board. But
So
I
I
still
won't
feel-
blame you.
Huh?
I said, so I won't blame you.
Okay. But when we look back, there's some ideas, and I don't think that I've had the support in order to get some of the things I'd like to see done when it comes to that. Do we need payments in lieu of taxes? Yes, we do. But I think we need to exercise more discretion in the type of industries, the type of jobs, the type of pay in which we incentivize. Now, one of the unique things about Memphis, I talk about our geography, where we're located. Outside of Washington, D.C., I can't think of any other major city that within 15 minutes of its downtown, you can be in 2 different jurisdictions.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to do with that, we have to realize that when we give up and we take a reduced amount for taxes to pay for the services that everyday citizens rely upon as Memphians, the burden is increased on those who are Memphians and Shelby Countyans. So one of the things that I would like to see, hey, tie it to those who live in Memphis and or Shelby County. Now, I know I'm going to get some pushback from Mr. Dolberger. He said, well, we won't be able to land anything, but I'm almost to the point that if we land a job in South Haven and it's paying a high wage, you don't have to have a zip code in Memphis, Tennessee for Memphians to benefit from it. But when we talk about giving tax incentives and increasing the burden on Memphians and Shelby Countyans who pay for the infrastructure here, who don't seem to be getting the jobs, I think we need to take another look at how we do things.
All right, before I offer any feedback, any panelists have anything to say about that? I'm thinking about the fact that people feel like there should be tighter regulations on people who basically are getting kickbacks and breaks from the city who don't live up to our labor and wage expectations. Like they should be paying higher wages and better benefits. And so I don't want to just talk about people who receive payment in lieu of taxes, but we can go ahead and here and talk about the temporary work pandemic as well. Sweet Trick, I saw that you raise your hand, so go for it. Yeah, you should unmute yourself, or Earl, you may need to unmute her. All right.
So I just wanted to say with the TIFs and pilots that are involved, I feel like there's not enough stipulations involved. A lot of our money is going out of the city. They're coming in and starting up businesses, and then because like we've experienced with Electrolux recently, they took all of those benefits of having those tax write-offs and left us hanging. That was a lot of money we could have put in our schools. We could have put that money into our transportation. We could have put that money into our housing. And so those are opportunities that we're missing because of those clawback clauses. And we need to change that. And also we need to make sure that giving people those pilots that are gonna care about their workers. As far as workplace safety, we've gotten people that are coming in, they're making their own money, but they're not paying out well to the workers. And they're also not returning it into the city. They take it out.
Mm-hmm. Beverly, go ahead.
So just a quick comment as it relates to that. Martavius, what I don't know is what were the parameters as they were defined by EDGE, or were any parameters defined by EDGE that really dictated who should get a pilot, how much the wages ought to be when they get a pilot, and have clawbacks established on the front end of it. Some of that I've heard about, Martavius, but I don't know if there are even parameters that govern that, because one of our committees that we're working on is making a recommendation in regards to some of that. But it would be good to kind of know what the history was, if they had parameters, if those parameters were tight, did they abide by those? What's the history of that?
Yes, and to be honest with you, the EDGE board predated my being on the Memphis City Council. But one of the things that I go back to, there's a piece of paper that I have, I think I saw it recently around the house as opposed to at the office. But this is when the City Council and the County Commission had a joint meeting, and this might have been about 3 years ago. And I really think there needs to be more coordination between the elected bodies, just so everyone can be on the same page, especially the fact that the EDGE board is a creation of both bodies. The Shelby County Commission and the City Council delegated their authority, gave up that authority. And I'm of the opinion that we may need to relook at it. Let's do an honest assessment. Have we achieved what we wanted to achieve when this board was created? Because in the sheet that I'm referencing, it says that the EDGE board was created to take politics out of job creation. However, my retort would be, whenever you're talking tax dollars, you cannot remove politics from it, because we're the elected ones are the ones who are the only ones who are directly accountable to the taxpayers for this. So what I'd hoped, and we have a new composition of the Memphis City Council, as you know. We just had an election last year. New members were sworn in, but 2.5 months in, that's when COVID hit, and we weren't able to really conduct our meetings and really have the in-depth discussions and work sessions to look at those things. But that's what I'd hope for us to take a look at. And I still haven't given up hope that we can have some more joint meetings. And and think about how ridiculous this is, that the City Council, County Commission has given up their authority, but there's not a regular joint meeting to say, okay, well, these are what the priorities are of these elected bodies, and EDGE, you go out here and execute it for us. That's something that's been absent that I think that we need to do as elected bodies.
Thanks. So I want to maybe make the question a bit sharper. I want to ask it like this. So we've said that the mission here is we want to see more power, information, and representation go to the electorate in Memphis. And so what I want to ask, maybe with some daggers under it immediately, is like, who do people need to target? Like, what needs to happen to cause temporary agencies and the companies who are getting these tax breaks, like, who do folks need to be upset with? Who can make that decision? Who do we need to press? That's the question. Don't all take it at once? What are we thinking?
Well, I'll take it. And I'm still doing the research behind it. I think that the EDGE board if the EDGE board is not the EDGE board, I can see that authority coming back to the elected bodies, because I still would look at it from the standpoint, can we objectively say we are better off from a job standpoint, wages standpoint, are we better off 10 years later than we were when this was created? If not, I think it's insane for us to continue going down the path that we've been on. But so short of that, what I'm doing the homework on is whenever or if there happens to be a pilot where they are going to be paying less than a certain amount, I haven't come up with that amount is, then you have to come back before the City Council and County Commission.
Before the next person responds, I do want to say that somebody's put in the chat that according to their view, Memphis has like 500 parcels for pilot, where Knox and several surrounding counties have, smaller factors.
That is correct. But like I said, we can't get away from it. I realize that you have to be competitive, but we just have to. And now I will share this, and I'll shut up and let everybody else speak. I do recall I was on the EDGE board when the first Amazon facility that is at Tullahoma and Holmes, I believe, when it first came about. And at that time, now we've gotten up to 15, maybe 15 then, but when they were first approved, my numbers may be off a bit, but I want to say that out of 600 jobs, there may have been 535 of them, a vast majority of them, that were at 13. In my estimation, that should not have been incentivized. And I made that point vocal when I was the liaison. I wasn't a voting member, but a project like that should not have been incentivized. And so I would hope that if we are in the job of subsidizing those type of wages, you need to come back to the elected bodies and let the elected bodies justify it. and make that decision. Now, if you're talking $50,000 jobs, you do that all day. You don't have to provide us any rationale for subsidizing those. But we're talking about a majority of ones that are $14, $15 an hour. No.
I'll just say, you know, when people talk about small government and transparency, I think anybody who's getting government money, like it should just be transparency, no matter what the rate of pay is. That's the first thing. I do want to also include that somebody is talking about companies specifically that hadn't done, so the Edge Board hadn't done an independent audit since 2014. They publicly posted. In other words, there's no transparency. People are talking about the flaws and the clawbacks. And I just want to put the question out again and give other people a chance to respond. Politically, which offices and which companies, like what's going on? And I'll give one because I just think that it's important that voters know. I'm a labor organizer, and so I've organized hospitals. I worked the Canton Nissan campaign, which failed under great travesty. Sweet Trika keeps talking about safety. Like there were people who died on the line. There was a massively oppressive management system where people were being basically told to take 2 Advil and get back out when they really needed medical attention. And so in tandem with people dying, we had this wage theft. Mississippi got this insane amount of money that they gave to the company, and they just didn't do well. They didn't manage it right. And so I know, for instance, here, there's a temporary company that works with Nike, and they advertise, I always say PTO, but it doesn't stand for paid time off. It stands for planned time off. So you're not going to be paid, but you need to anticipate when you'll be sick, right? We know that you can work at these as a temporary worker for 2 years. By now, like you should know, either I can do it or I can't do it. How am I temporary, right, for 2 years, right? So I'm asking the question, who should people be upset about? Like, who do we need to take power from? Who do we need to replace? I know people don't want to pick winners and losers, but I'm asking it sharply for a reason.
Well, relative to the temporary worker issue and these temp agencies, that's a problem. That's a problem in the marketplace, and there's no question about that. And a couple of years ago, while Phil Trineri was the president of the chamber, they sat down and they met with a group of temporary agencies. And the whole intent of that meeting was to say to those temporary agencies, we're going to put in place a gold standard, but those who will bear that standard or will be eligible for that standard must do 2 things. Number 1, they must pay people higher wages. And the second thing that they've got to do is they've got to offer healthcare benefits. And the third thing is they need to put those workers on a path, training path, so that they can have full-time jobs. Because we know that part of the problem is when these workers get to a certain point with these companies, they, for some reason, there's an excuse to let them go. And frankly, that I have heard that time and time again, and I know that's a reality for a lot of people. So we started implementing this gold standard where we were saying, look, you are only eligible if you, 1, provide people higher wages. And it wasn't, I don't think it was $15 an hour at the time, but higher wages. Number 2, healthcare benefits. And number 3, you put some training in place for them to move from part-time or temporary to full-time employees with these organizations. So it wouldn't be at the end of 6 months. I don't know, Sweet Trika, what it is, but at the end of some certain period of time, you are told you don't have a job anymore, and for no good reason necessarily. So what we are going to do, and what one of the recommendations is from some of the work that we've been doing, is we re-implement the gold standard and we push temporary firms to really work toward being a gold standard firm. One of the guys who decided to take advantage of that now is working with a major, and he did all of those things. He paid higher wages, he did a training program, he offered healthcare benefits, and now he's in a position to get big contracts now with larger firms. and he's doing some work with larger firms, but he said it was to his advantage. And Gary knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He said his employees were happier, they did better work for the organization, and they knew that there was a path for them. So
Jason
Chambers
Gillum.
is taking on some of that responsibility. I don't know, Gary, you may want to.
Well, that's Jason Gillum with Millennial Search. And I was just going to say that really who we should go after is really large corporations, to get them to do what Beverly's talking about. Embrace the gold standard, hire firms like Jason's. He's an African-American Black business leader. Hire people like him and firms like his, and that ups the standard for everybody. So really, I'm a big believer in collective action. And I also believe that corporations, when they're shown an opportunity to do the right thing, most of them take advantage of that. So Jason's onto something. He's getting some big contracts, and that's the way to make things happen.
So I'm going to segue into a larger than Memphis deal. I just kind of want to see if we would get into this specifically. So if I were to sum up what I think Beverly and Gary said, it was that we should use positive incentives, right? Like reinforcements, like if you put out this gold standard and maybe you can encourage big businesses to sort of like aspire to this gold standard. I want to talk about one of the things I know is just a hot topic for folks. Like it's not because we haven't seen economic growth. That's not why the typical wage earner isn't seeing growth. That wealth is being concentrated with what we hear the 1%, right? CEOs and that sort of a thing. We know that CEOs of larger firms are making nearly like 300 times the mean wage of their workers. And it's not because they've gotten, drastically more productive or they have this special set of skills. For financial people, like we know that this is largely about things like stock buybacks and this sort of a thing. It's not that they have, acquired this new skill set that means that they are 300 times more productive than workers. And so I want to like push that as a conversation. Folks in the chat are still asking these questions too. So should wages be tied to worker productivity? Is there this idea of the cost of living, inflation? Will giving people $15 an hour mean that unemployment skyrockets? It's not that I'm unaware of the research around this. I just want to give you guys a chance to talk about that. Like what's going to happen? Everybody makes $15 an hour tomorrow. What does Memphis look like? What does the country look like?
Well, you said you want to get into the socialism conversation.
Let's do it.
And, yeah, let's do it. So I believe there is a social responsibility we have as a nation that we have abdicated. We aren't providing adequate childcare. We aren't providing universal health care. We're not really providing adequate funds for education. So there is a responsibility that needs to be addressed. I'm not a believer in socialism, but I am a believer in taking wealth that is accumulated by high wage individuals and redistributing that through taxes. So sooner or later, that's what has to happen. I don't believe everything Bernie Sanders says, but I think he was on the right track. Socialism is such a negative term for so many people in this country. You got to stay away from it. But we do have to dive into what's it going to take to fix a lot of our social ills, and it's going to take money. And we've got to figure out how to get it.
All right. So Gary says not socialism, but he used another cuss word, redistribution. Any thoughts about that? What are you guys thinking? So graduated tax rates. We know during Reagan taxes were like 90% for people who made this type of money. Now it's like the opposite. So what are we thinking?
The problem is nobody's making money they're supposed to be making, period. The bottom is not making enough to get above water. The people that are barely above water can barely stay there. And the people that are above water are so glad that they're not drowning. They're just barely making it with the taxes that they're having to pay out. It's just not fair all the way around. And we've got to find a way to balance it out. To stay where we are just should not be an option. We've been here for way, way, way too long. To even say that we have a minimum wage of 7.25 cents is ridiculous and redundant. It's draconian. It's just, it makes no sense. And then we look down on people that are struggling daily to get back and forth to work, to pay for child care, and people that are forced to ride the buses because they can't afford to have the luxury of having a car because trying to pay for a roof over their heads. It's just, we've got to raise the bar, and it has to happen quickly. It needs to happen really fast. We saw that with the increase that we had with unemployment. People were finally living, and folks were complaining because they were making more money. And it just doesn't make sense. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We should be able to live. And now you've got people that are like, I'm at work, I'm working all hard, and I don't get paid that. That's because you should be. And we all need to come together and make sure it happens.
All right. So what are the policies? Like what are the policies that need to be passed? Like, again, I have some answers and I'll push if nobody does, says anything, but like everybody here is a long time person in this private sector. Like you guys know about money. What's the policies that need to be pushed? What are big corporations saying they don't want or they do want? Like what needs to happen for folks to make the money? I think it's greed and evil, but I'm trying to give room for other people to say some other things. All right.
Well, let me say something that probably is similar, and I think one of the issues that I find is there needs to be a whole lot more neighborhood reinvestment. I think our communities, especially our specific neighborhoods, have been disinvested in for years and years and years, and that's why we have some of the issues. Because I know when I grew up, there were a lot of things in my neighborhood. There were jobs that you could walk to. There were people who were entrepreneurs who were in the community. There were lots of opportunities that existed right in your neighborhood, whether it was Beltlines or Orange Mound or Binghamton. And I think those communities have been disinvested in. And I would say that it isn't by accident sometimes that disinvestment has occurred. And the other thing about it is, CRAs were part of the law, asking banks that had actually redlined our communities to reinvest. But we don't really know where those dollars are going, what those dollars are being used for. Are neighborhoods getting those dollars? Are nonprofits that are scalable in the community? Because I think if we start reinvesting in our neighborhoods and in the organizations that exist there, and employment opportunities that could be there, then that might be part of it. But your question is really a bigger question too, but I wanted to say neighborhood reinvestment is something that I find, whether it's reinvestment in housing, job training and opportunities, literacy. I mean, all of those things are things that contribute to a stronger neighborhood, which contributes to a stronger Memphis. And right. People being able to access opportunities.
All right, so I'm gonna push it again. Again, this one may have some daggers in it. I'm just giving trigger warnings, as they say. So here's the thing. When we say our neighborhoods have been disinvested, right? Like somebody did it, right? And the question is who? Like that's passive voice. And
I'm like business leaders, I'm sure.
And I'm gonna make the argument that one of the reasons that people may have advertised Memphis as a place for low wage workers is because it's 65% Black, and that this is something that is something you feel that you can pass with politically if you target minority and Black communities. And so I think that this is the reason why you don't see a bunch of investment in changing the education, because you want the educational investment to match what you expect from this workforce in the next 10, 20, or however many years. So again, I'm gonna ask the question like, what are the policies and who do we need to be pointing at? Like, what does the general electorate need to know and what policy do we need to be pushing? That's what I'm asking.
I think there should be a proportional amount given to CEOs. Why is it that we have CEOs in Tennessee making between $760,000 a year to over $1 million, and their workers are only making $12 and $14 an hour? Why? It's because it's top heavy. if you would distribute that just a little bit more along the lines and down, I mean, we could, there's money there. We found that out when this pandemic hit. There is money available. It's about how we're distributing between us. And I think that we need to look at that. You know, people should not be making $1 million while they got workers making $9 an hour.
But the answer isn't CEO pay. I mean, if you look at even like Fred Smith's pay, his pay is a fraction of a percent of the total revenue of FedEx, which is now $60 billion plus dollars. So it really does get back to internal policies and how they distribute the total amount of revenue. And that's mostly driven by the market. I think when you get into a discussion of wealth redistribution, you've got to talk about the federal policies. You got to talk about primarily tax policy and how does that capture significant billions of dollars and redistribute those to help workers and to really lower their taxes. I mean, I'm all for that. As someone who's made a lot of money, I totally support that. I just think we have gotten things way out of whack, to your point. Am I trying to justify CEO pay? No, I'm not. But that's not going to change. That's what the market is. I mean, that's to get the talent, you've got to pay a certain level of salary to really attract somebody who can professionally run your corporation.
So you said two things, and I want to give adequate attention to both of those. One, I do want to get folks to chime in on the CEO piece. One, I think it's only been in the last couple of years that we even got information about what CEOs were paid. And I think that big firms pushed back on this because they knew that there would be some type of problem that people had, knowing that there was this big of a pay disparity. And again, I am saying that I don't think that the talented people of today deserve 300 times the regular worker when in the 60s or 70s, they made 30 times. So I do want to, go ahead.
I'm not trying to justify that. I'm trying to say that even if you address that and pay CEOs a lot less, it would not solve the issues that Switrika is talking about.
Okay.
And you can see what not-for-profit CEOs make in their 990s and what all public company CEOs make in their shareholder documents that are sent out to the public every year. So all of that is very, very public. And now the SEC and others are requiring the CEOs to put what multiple of worker pay.
That's what I was discussing right there. Yeah,
that is new. You're right about that. Right about that.
If I could chime in a bit, and Gary, you brought up that word that S word, socialism. But you know, as I've thought about things, and what we don't realize is that socialism we've been hit up beside the head with it. But we live in a socialist society, whether we admit it or not. And let me frame it this way: Montgomery, Williamson, Shelby, Davidson, Knox, Hamilton, Madison, Rutherford. Those are the 8 largest counties in the state of Tennessee. Because we're in a sales tax driven state, we may, here in Shelby County, we paid 9 3/4.
Yeah.
We only get 2 3/4 back. The rest of that 7 is distributed amongst the other 87 counties in Tennessee that do not have the population that we do. That's socialism. We're and so, you know, you think about it on a national level, everybody, you know, the current president is bastardizing cities, but cities are the economic drivers of this country. You know, you look at the takers, but we have to look at it from the standpoint that, look, we are all Americans. Do we have 10, 20, 1,000, 2,000 acre farms to provide us the food in Shelby County? No, we don't. So we need to see more of a cooperative system, but realize, hey, we need you all to provide the food, the produce, the stuff we need to live by, but you need us to provide the revenue that gives you the infrastructure in your area, because just based upon your sparsity population, you can't do it on your own.
So Martavius, I want to say that I think Gary is a point of policy brought up graduated taxes. I think that would be a fair thing.
It's still a policy, because if we could say, if we were more so of an income tax driven state versus a sales tax, and there's no incentive. So think about it. You think about those state senators, those state house members, they're not going to take money off of their table that the cities provide them. You know, I don't know what the solution is, but you know, I just want to remind everybody, we live in a socialist society, although they want to use it to say it's a bad thing, because we are paying for those areas that do not have the financial resources that we do in more populous counties to spread it all throughout the state of Tennessee.
And to that point, the only thing that I would say is there are a lot of policies, public policies, that are on the books, that have been on the books for 50, 75, 100 years, and nobody has ever looked at them to try to change them. I mean, you got policies that affect, you know, somebody who's gotten incarcerated because they didn't pay child support, and they get out and they have to pay a certain amount of money. Well, they can't get a job, you know, but there are policies that keep people oppressed, and they continue to remain on the books. And I think one of the things that would be important is to have our folks at the state level, or even city and county government, to look at the policies that get in the way of people making a decent living, or the obstacles that you put in place when people may have committed a minor crime that keeps them in the system for 10 years. They can't get out of it because they don't have the resources to be able to do it. There are lots of policies like that that we have not begun to even scratch the surface of, or nobody's assuming responsibility for looking at them. Now, maybe there are people on city council and county commission who are aware of it. Frankly, when I was in nonprofit, I became more aware of that than any place else I've ever been. And so for me, that's a limitation, and that's an issue that nobody is addressing that I know of.
I think that speaks to why your organization is important. We've got to get elected leaders at the state level, especially, in place to address those policies, Beverly, because you're absolutely right. And Martavius, to not have an income tax in this state is one of our biggest issues. That's why we underfund education so badly. I mean, we've got to get people elected who will take that constitutional amendment, throw it away, and implement an income tax. Now, that's not popular with everybody. The income tax would really start at a certain wage, and it would not be below, I wouldn't hope, $50,000. All
right, I want to take a moment and ask a couple of questions from folks. I'm going to come back, and I want to kind of cue Sweet Trika. You hadn't said the U word, unions. I want to talk about that, especially since we're in Tennessee and the role that has played in people's increase or decrease in wages. But from the questions, I think it's Reginald Upshaw asking, the stock market is affected by social programs. Why? Anybody here feel especially equipped to be able to answer that? Stock market and social programs, why they would be correlated at all?
Well, I think anytime you raise the specter of increased corporate taxes, that really concerns the market, and the market hates uncertainty. And if there's a feeling that taxation is going to take away from profitability and shareholder value, then it's going to negatively impact the market. If that's the question. I think the other part of that is publicly traded companies are increasingly being held to a standard of social responsibility. So we are seeing some good things occur in terms of environment and inclusion that corporations are embracing more and more, especially after George Floyd. You saw advertisements in the Wall Street Journal pronouncing changes in policy that corporations were making.
I'm definitely going to come back to that. I want to ask Charles Belinki's question. Can anything be done to shift the preferred site for a car factory from the mega site to the former Firestone plant? Anybody feel particularly able to answer that question?
Yeah, let me take a stab at that. The mega site is certainly a site that is huge, that is located outside of Memphis. I think maybe on the other side of maybe Jackson or close to that Jackson, Tennessee. And it is a lot of property that has existed there. One of the issues with that site is that we don't have sewer lines run. And of course, we could attract a car company if that site is a ready site, you know. But what I will say is, in terms of Firestone, the site has real problems, chemical problems, environmental problems, and the cleanup of that site is phenomenal. Some of that responsibility could be on the federal government, but a lot of it is on the local market being able to clean that site up. And I will say that maybe the person asking the question is not aware of the fact that one of our foundation leaders said, look, I want to clean up this site so this site can be used. But once he had his folks doing due diligence on the site, the cost for the cleanup is so astronomical that even this particular foundation did not have sufficient funds to be able to clean the site up in such a way that it would allow the occupancy of a large company to exist on the site and do business. It's a great asset in Memphis. We've got to figure it out because it's right in the middle of a neighborhood that needs the jobs. So somehow we've got to be able to figure that out. But we've done a lot of work on that site. And a number of times we've done work on that site. So just so that you know, that's part of the environmental concerns around that site is really the issue.
All right, so we've mentioned socialism, and I would say that an argument that I feel like is a bit sharper than many of the panelists may have is like, we seem to socialize things for corporations, right? And then that kind of we privatize the responsibility or the profits, right? So like the payment in lieu of taxes, that's a social program basically, right? These companies got the contributions of everybody who pays taxes in the city, but then they kind of walk away with their profits, right? I think it's Shahida Jones who is clarifying or pushing back on the comment about income taxes in education, for example. I think that a challenge as somebody who's organized for teachers with AFT is that you have lawmakers who ultimately are being funded by people who want to see education privatized. And so they have the political incentive to push policies that really make public education more difficult and the funding more challenging. And so with that, I just want to kind of talk about, since we say it's socialism, what the right normally does with that word is say class warfare, right? You want to pick winners and losers. You are teaching poor people to hate richer people and this sort of thing. And with Up to Vote 901 and Sweet Trika, this is coming to you. Our deal is we want to see, see people have power, right? And so like what role have unions had historically in seeing people have more power and that translate to better wages and benefits? Are unions just a business that take up people's money too? Like, what does it look like?
So that is exactly what corporations want people to think. They're always against unions and union busting. We experienced that recently here in Chattanooga with Volkswagen. They were ready to unionize because they knew being a part of a union means that I finally get a voice where I work. A lot of times in the workplace, the voice is usually the boss. And people will murmur and people will complain, but they will go back to the line and they will pack and they will ship and they will go home. The issue with having the benefit of having a union is that you actually get a chance to have a voice and get to bargain what it is that you need as an employee. If my insurance is going up, I should have a right to say how much, or if that is going to fit for me. And if it's not, you need to go back to the table and fix it. So we need to make sure that people understand unions are actually extremely beneficial. They have been a part of big fights back in, I think it was the 1960s with the washerwomen. It might have been further back, but with the washerwomen, we had women to organize. They were getting paid cents pennies compared to other people that were doing the same service, and generally because they were the Black help in those areas. And so when they pulled together and started unionizing and started actually, thank you, Atlanta washerwomen, when they started unionizing together, they were able to do more and get real rights and get fair pay. When people come together as a union, they actually give, not only they take away power from the boss, but they give power to themselves. And we need to feel that as individuals. Nothing feels more defeated, makes a person feel more defeated than leaving a job, knowing you're unsatisfied and not having an outlet, not having anyone to really talk to, which is why they have people in place like you have leadership stewards that you can go and talk to when you have an issue with the boss. You know, there are so many beneficial pieces that are a part of being a part of a union rather than just being a worker.
Well,
Anybody?
I want to pull Gary into this as somebody who's kind of led a few organizations. Like, what do you think? Like, are unions going to come in and bankrupt the company, make people have to leave and take jobs to China? What do you think?
Well, when you have employers who demonstrate what Sritrika's talking about, they don't listen. There's not an open door policy. There aren't adequate venues and processes in place to ensure people are being treated properly. Absolutely, you need a union. I agree with that. I always tried to run my organizations with a culture that said, you know, we want to take care of you. You can come to us. You don't need a third party. That's not the case with every corporation in America.
Right.
That's not the case with most of them.
Right. I want to push, because I think one of the things that I want to stress with Up to Vote is that we care about shared power, not just an increase in wages. And I think that what happens is you often see companies sort of try to pacify workers with doing a little better so that companies retain all of the power and the ability to do better as they feel like it. The difference with, I would argue, with the union is that you have a legal say as a legal bargaining unit. It's the closest that you can have as workers to say an executive board, right, who gets to make these decisions. But I'd like to give Martavius and Beverly a chance to weigh in. Unions are a cuss word on the right side of the political spectrum, and perhaps the left may be too generous to them, but I want to pull people in and give people a chance to hear this. And mainly because Tennessee's not a northeastern state, right? Like the laws and the culture around unions for Tennessee has been a bit different. And I was trying to give our AFL-CIO and City Labor Council fair space, but people chime in like, is that going to help or is that going to hurt? What do you think? Unions.
Well, one of the things that I will say is I've historically been supportive of unions because I view them from years ago, you know, back in the 60s and 70s when I worked in corporate America. You know, we didn't have a union, but I've always sort of viewed them from then as an opportunity for employees to get some sense of equity, some sense of fairness. That's how I view them. But I've had some conversations with some people who are working with an existing union within a business. And I will tell you what they have shared with me. Mm-hmm. They've shared with me that they're responsible for people, and these are Black and brown, these are Black people who are talking to me. Now, I want to be clear about that. Mm-hmm. They're saying that they work with this union. They're trying to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to do. And one of them's comment was that the unions are actually serving as protectors to keep people from doing the things that they ought to be doing for the organization. And there are people within companies that look just like us who have a very strong opinion about what the union stewards are not doing to elevate the workforce, one, to the standard of here's how you need to be meeting expectations, and then protect, you know, this person ain't been to work in 60 days and they only had 30 days, but they go in and they try to defend that other 30 days. And that tends to be problematic. And the people that I'm talking to are people who at one point had high regard for unions, but
Right.
now they sort of feel that the union is an abuser. So I say that not from my experience, Sweetrika, but more from having a conversation with someone who has been sued by the unions several times, and the unions have lost because the documentation and the data does not support the union's position.
Now,
So
I want to give you a chance to respond to that. I want to frame it this way. The union's protecting lazy workers, okay?
that's what she said.
All right.
That's
So
what
I've heard that a few times. Take it away.
and lots of them. That is not a few, but a lot of them.
What would you say?
what I wanted to say with is that is not something that you would not hear, right? With every company, there's an issue. And sometimes there's an issue with leadership. That is why they elect their leadership. So when there's an issue with leaders, you have to replace them eventually. There's not always going to be a perfect yin and yang within an organization or a business, but to have the opportunity to have a voice in your company is much more than just being told what to do on a daily basis and not having any power or any say in what happens to you, your family, because your wages affect your family, and the people that you work with daily. Yes, sometimes people get caught up in a union organization that doesn't feel like it is meeting their needs, but there are also times when people get irritated because what they saw as a priority wasn't met. And now at that point now, the union is now their enemy. But the issue they have to understand is they're a part of the union. It is not a third party. You are a part of a union. When you join the union, you are a part of that union. If that union doesn't work, you must say something. You as a body together must speak together to make sure that the issues that are problematic are addressed properly, and there is more than enough systems within that union, within your union, to get those things advocated for. And there's arbitration, there's mediation, there's so many more things involved rather than saying, my boss harassed me and I don't feel like that's fair. Well, too bad, go get back on the line.
All right, thanks so much. So I want to do two things. Gary, she alluded to your third party language, so I want to give you a chance to respond. And Martavius, we understand that you needed to step away for a second. We're glad you're back. We were having a conversation about the impact of unions. Ms. Beverly said, hey, there are Black folk who have said that they started out being pro-union and they have experienced what they see as negative impact of unions. They're protecting lazy workers. I will tell you all as a unionist, to our viewers and the panelists, whenever I was hit with that comment, I would just ask the question, are there lazy workers on your job now? Do you have a union? The answer is no. So who's protecting those lazy workers now, right? So maybe, maybe it could be some bigotry and you're always looking at the other person and calling them lazy, right? That's part of it, right? But then two, like, unions are not magic wands. And I want to be the first to say this, particularly for folks who are watching. As a unionist, I think unions suffer with all the same problems that America does. So racism, sexism, et cetera, et cetera. But I do still think that they are probably the best mechanisms for workers to have a better share of power, which is really the conversation that I'm trying to have. Not just what you can give me, but power. Gary, I want to come to you. So third party or not, why did you say unions are a third party? Talk to us about that.
My personal leadership philosophy running a big organization, and Beverly sat on my board, I think she could attest to this, is that I want to communicate directly with my associates. I want to have an environment where they do feel empowered, where they can pick up the phone and call and we can address issues. Now, I recognize that's not always the case. And when it's not, then you may need a third party. So that's how I
just coming back. You got any?
The good thing about that is that when you need a third party, like a lawyer, it's already together. You don't have to go plan it out. They're already in place that is part of the union dues that people pay out. Like the protection is already built in. And you don't have that working as a regular worker. You got to go get your own lawyer. You got to pay a lot of money out of pocket, and it could be years and years of delegation.
Could you speak to wine garden rights? Like for people who don't know, because my feeling about sitting in with my boss is that it could be investigatory, right? Or disciplinary. And so there's a power dynamic difference. When I sit in with them, if there is no collective bargaining unit, like I don't feel like it's almost like I might be encountering the police and whatever I say can and will be used against me. Like, you know, let's talk about that. Is it really two equals meeting if you meet with an employer and you don't have a union? And everybody can feel free to chime in. I just think that people should hear this as a dynamic because in my experience, most people don't tell the truth and don't say how they really feel because it's kind of a hostage, you know, a captive audience sort of situation when you meet with your employer. So people feel free to chime in. Like, is this a third party? Are the power dynamics equal? What do you think? Beverly, Martavius, you guys hadn't really spoken in a second, so I want to make sure I give you an opportunity.
Well, I've never been a part of a union.
Okay.
None of my family members were part of unions. However, I do recognize that, and I don't think that it's coincidence that our nation's level of what would be the greatest total prosperity was a period where union membership was at its highest. I think that when we, you know, I have to stress to, you know, the young people that I'm around, a lot of the education that you're going to get is going to be way after you're 18, way after you're 22, 23, when you graduate from college. Because this was, you know, what I'm about to say, this is nothing that was taught to me. Particularly with us, with our living in the South and the historical perspective of unions and the resistance to unions in the South was they didn't think that a Black man or Black woman should make the same amount of money that a white man or a Black woman should make. That's the history of unions in the South in general. And so when we look at some of the low wages that we have here, so that's the South in general, but I have to look at Memphis. When we look at some of the low wages that we're sitting here fighting about, I think that it is we've allowed the power to go beyond, and you know, it's always going to be a power shift, because I remember it might have been an econ class that my econ teacher told me that you're going to want the most when you go to that job, but it's in that employer's interest to pay you as little as they have to. Now, there's going to be some medium in between that you have to come to that agreement on, but you're never going to be paid what you think you're worth. And, you know, from the standpoint, when we look at how in some instances, and there have been perverted issues where same people doing the same job, but one person is making substantially more for doing the same amount of work, you know, particularly in the South, I don't know how we can get beyond. I think that we're in a place where we are because we haven't had the strength of a union in the South. And that's just my take on things from a person who's never been a part of a union.
I got you. We have a question also from Josh Adams. It says, what is the best mechanism to make sure that a portion of created wealth is retained by individuals and corporations? Which piece of legislation do you think best protects this mechanism? Anybody want to take a stab at it? If I could reword it, I might ask it this way. Are unions the best way to make sure that workers and corporations get some of the growth, right? And what policy would you suggest if not unions? I apologize, Josh, if that didn't do it justice. Anybody want to take a stab at that?
What I want to say is, Beverly, please go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that unions came into being because there was oppression, inequity, unfairness, deaths, all of these things that affected the employees that worked for companies. and unions kind of helped to what I would call level the playing field, because it's not just about lazy people. It really is about equity and benefits. It really is about, you know, fairness overall in the organization. You know, you don't assign me 50 hours and you assign somebody else who is on my level, you know, 30 or 40. You know, I get to work all the overtime, even if I want it or not, if I don't want it. So the inequity of the working conditions is what unions have traditionally been able to level out. And I think the great thing about the positive is that unions actually do that work on behalf of the employees in organizations where there doesn't seem to be the equity and the fairness directed toward all employees. So they level out the playing field in organizations.
Right. So we
continue to.
Excuse me?
And continue to.
And continue to.
So we have about 5 minutes left. And I wanna kind of like think of some takeaways. We've heard people talk about redistribution and graduated wealth. I'm pushing the union thing as, you know, moderator privilege, I guess, because I want people to think about this. There's a difference between justice and charity. And I think that so often when we start having the conversations about business, people want you to cajole the businesses with like incentives and like the workers can be strong on, because what nobody's actually said is that the history of organizing was met with violence. Like literally corporations hired folk to kill, maim. You should Google the history of riding shotgun. Like it's not just getting in the passenger seat. Like there was violence.
It's like paid KKK.
Right. And I just think that it's really important to say that if we're talking about incentivizing and maybe corporations being able to give charity, people will get on board with that. But if you start talking about redistribution of power, even more than redistribution of wages, that there is serious agitation. But I just, you know, think that people should think about who holds the power, if that's fair and if that's right. We got 4 minutes. Anybody have something that they feel like they really just didn't get a chance to get out in that amount of time? I know it seems like it was 15 minutes because you guys are all saying wonderful stuff. Anything you would say?
One thing I add about unions is the fact that the work of unions that has benefited non-union workers as well as the union members.
That's good stuff. Yeah.
Especially, which is why we need to make sure that we say no to the Kelsey Amendment, trying to make right to work a permanent thing in our Constitution. It's something that's out there. We're fighting it. You all need to fight for it too, because unions are benefiting you. What we do in our union organizations is to help bring those wages up and to help make sure you have protection, that you have health care, that you have what you need to provide for your family, and that you can go home safely. Unions are there to help you. If we block it with the Kelsey Amendment, then that's going to hurt us. And it's something that we may never be able to return back to.
All right. Beverly or Gary?
Well, yeah, first of all, let me thank you guys for hosting this, because, you know, rarely do we get an opportunity to talk for real stuff, you know, in a forum like this, and have the union at the table and somebody from business at the table, and, you know, people who don't ever talk to each other. You know, we don't get the opportunity to talk to each other like this, in real language, down home, where we all can understand. So I think we need to do more of these, because as much as you are asking the question, we're also learning too. We're learning from Sweet Trika, and we're learning from Mr. Crawford. We're learning from Martavius, you know, and that helps all of us. So I just wanted to applaud you for the information and for having the participants, the diverse mix of participants on this, elected official and, you know, a business leader. I just think that's really important, and I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Gary. I think we're at the 2-minute mark. It's on you.
I'll just echo that very briefly. I think that the answer to so many of our problems is communication, understanding one another, working through solutions together. And I just thank you all for the opportunity to participate, applaud your work. I think, again, what you're doing with the Get Out the Vote, this is largely about our elected officials and policies that are made by folks like Martavius. So continue the great work.
Thanks so much. I think that will conclude this evening. I'd like to thank each of our panelists for coming out. We appreciated each perspective. Hopefully the people who are watching have some concrete takeaways. We look forward to seeing you at the next symposium. Be on the lookout. Peace and good night to everybody.